For most of human history, roads were barely roads at all. If you were living in 1880, getting somewhere beyond your own town meant navigating rutted mud tracks that swallowed wagon wheels whole, hiring a horse you might not own, and accepting that most journeys would take days. You were slow, at the mercy of weather, and completely unable to outrun the pace of an animal. Horses were your engine. They decided how far you could go and how fast you could get there. And yet somehow, out of everything industrializing civilization was building, the one invention that came to define modern life wasn't the telegraph, wasn't the railroad, wasn't even electricity. It was the car. Today, there are roughly 197 billion motor vehicles on Earth. They carry us to hospitals in emergencies, deliver every product in every shop, let people live 30 miles from where they work, and sit in traffic jams playing podcasts about history. But the car was never designed to do any of that. No inventor sat down and said, we should reshape the entire planet around a personal combustion box. The car was built almost by accident. And the strangest part is that the world it created was one nobody planned and almost nobody wanted until suddenly everyone couldn't imagine living without it. To understand how this happened, you have to picture life in the 1880s. Cities were crowded, loud, and coated in something nobody talks about anymore: horse manure. London in 1900 had 11,000 horse-drawn cabs. Each bus required 12 horses per day. There were more than 50,000 working horses in London alone, and every one of them produced waste. On hot summer days, the smell in major cities was unbearable. Dead horses were left in streets for days because removal was expensive. New York was pulling roughly 15,000 dead horses off its streets every single year. People weren't dreaming of cars because cars weren't a concept yet. They were dreaming of cleaner horses, better streetcars, maybe faster trains. Nobody was looking for what came next. Now, here's the important part. Karl Benz wasn't trying to change civilization. He was an obsessive engineer in Mannheim, Germany, who wanted to build a self-propelled vehicle because he found the mechanical puzzle irresistible. He was the son of a railway engineer who died when Karl was 2. As a student, he'd bicycle to university and daydream about a machine that moved without an animal pulling it. His early businesses failed. His wife Bertha bailed him out twice using her own dowry. And in 1885, after years of tinkering in a workshop his wife's money kept afloat, Benz got his 3-wheeled patent motor wagon running under its own power for the first time. The first public demonstration crashed into a wall. Nobody wanted to buy it. Benz wrote later that after the breakthrough, he felt like a beggar knocking at the door of humanity, unable to get anyone to listen. But the machine worked, and it was Bertha, not Karl, who actually proved it to the world. In August 1888, without telling her husband, she took the car and her 2 teenage sons on a 104-kilometer trip from Mannheim to Pforzheim, the first long-distance automobile journey in history. She stopped at pharmacies along the way to buy fuel, since gasoline was still sold as a cleaning solvent. When the wooden brakes failed on a downhill stretch, she taught a local shoemaker into nailing leather onto the brake blocks, inventing brake linings on the spot. She sent Karl a telegram from Pforzheim that night. News spread. People suddenly understood that this thing wasn't just a novelty. It could actually take you somewhere. Over the next 2 decades, the car evolved almost accidentally alongside the people who fell in love with tinkering on engines. Hundreds of small manufacturers sprang up, most of them gone within years. Then Henry Ford, a farm mechanic from Michigan who taught himself engineering by taking apart and rebuilding everything he could find, made a decision in 1908 that changed the world. He would build a car for ordinary people. His Model T wasn't the fastest or the most beautiful. It was simple, reliable, and brutally cheap to produce. When Ford introduced the moving assembly line in 1913, he slashed the time to build a car from 12 hours to 93 minutes. The price dropped from $80.25 to $260 within 2 decades. In 1910, there were fewer than 50 passenger cars per 10,000 Americans. By 1930, there were more than 1,800. Think about how fast that is. A technology that barely existed in 1885 had, within 50 years, become as common as furniture. And humans had noticed the benefits almost immediately. A horse needed feeding, rest, veterinary care, stabling, and still died in the street. A car sat still for free, started when you needed it, and could cover in an hour what would have taken a horse all day. Farmers suddenly had genuine access to towns. Workers could live farther from factories. A rural family in Georgia wrote to Ford in 1918, "Your car lifted us out of the mud. It brought joy into our lives." The automobile was becoming not just transportation but liberation from geography, from class, from the slow tyranny of animal pace. This is why historians consider the car the central technology of the 20th century. Not the airplane, not the computer, not nuclear power, the car. Earlier than highways, earlier than suburbs, earlier than shopping malls, the car came first and everything else was built around it. As America paved its roads and built its gas stations, the car changed again in order to stay alongside us. Cities restructured themselves for parking. Governments spent billions on highways. In 1956, President Eisenhower signed the Interstate Highway Act, 42,500 miles of new road, and within a generation, the American suburb was born as a landscape that was physically impossible to navigate without a car. And over those same decades, the car and human life began reshaping each other at a deeper level than anyone expected. The car didn't just change how people moved. It changed where people lived, who they married, what they ate, what music they listened to, what they considered freedom. Drive-in movies, fast food, the radio sing-along, the road trip, the teenage right of getting a license at 16, all of these are car culture, born from the machine. Entire industries exist only because the car exists. Gas stations, motels, tire manufacturers, auto insurance, parking lots, car washes, drive-thrus. The car didn't enter human life. Human life reorganized itself around the car. But that reorganization came with a cost. Cars brought pollution, traffic deaths, and sprawl that made cities less walkable and communities less connected. More than 135 million people die in road crashes worldwide every year. The average passenger vehicle emits 4 metric tons of carbon dioxide annually, and there are 1,000 billion of them. Cities designed for cars are often hostile to anyone who doesn't have one. The very liberation the car promised also created new forms of dependency, a world where you cannot access a grocery store, a job, or a doctor without one. And yet traces of the original freedom still survive. The open highway still means something. The road trip is still a rite of passage. Inside every gridlocked commuter slowly losing their mind on the freeway is the shadow of someone who just wants to go somewhere. And maybe that's why the car feels different from every other machine. Refrigerators preserve food. Telephones connect people. Computers process information. But cars do something stranger. They move us through the world at a speed that feels like agency, like power, like control over where our lives go next. In a graveyard in Ladenburg, there is a plaque near where Karl Benz is buried that doesn't say much about engineering or patents or horsepower. It says, essentially, that here was a man who wanted to build something that moved. And tonight, when you drive somewhere you've driven 1,000 times without thinking about it, you're the beneficiary of that obsession, a chain of accidents, ambitions, and wrong turns that ended up reshaping the entire surface of human civilization. No master plan, no grand design. Just a man in a workshop, his wife's money, and a machine that crashed into a wall on its first public test. But now you do.